What is the scariest paranormal experience you've had that still makes your blood run cold? In 1982, I lived in a house on Wing Lake Road, Birmingham/Bloomfield Township, Michigan. A residence later featured on Jim Harold's Paranormal podcast and in one of Brad Steiger's books. This account recounts the events as I experienced them, offering a first-hand glimpse into life in a house that was undeniably haunted. The address is on Wing Lake Road in Birmingham, Michigan, the first or second house on the right when entering from the south. With a gravel driveway, the house was painted a pale yellow when I lived there in 1982. At that time, I was a sophomore in high school, about 14 or 15, didn't drink, didn't do drugs, and was a fairly normal teenager, trying to navigate school and life like any kid that age. The first night my family moved in, all the lights in the house went out, except for those in the garage beneath the small attic. And the attic itself. The door to the small attic would slowly creak open, and then, within a minute, slam shut with a sound that echoed eerily through the quiet house. That first night set the tone for everything that followed, leaving a lingering unease I couldn't explain. Often, while standing still in the house, I would get an unsettling sensation, as if someone cold was walking up behind me and placing their hand directly on my shoulder. Quickly turning around made the feeling vanish, only for it to return moments later, leaving me questioning if I had imagined it or if something unseen lingered in the shadows, just out of sight. During dinner, we would frequently hear the sound of a ball bouncing over our heads. The noise was reminiscent of a ping pong ball dropped and bouncing at an increasing pace, yet it continued over several minutes in a strangely rhythmic, almost deliberate pattern, unexplainable by any logical means. Twice, when entering the garage, a large, rusty 3-inch nail fell from a ceiling with no nails at all, floated through the air, struck the garage divider, bounced off a box, and hit the floor with a distinct ping before vanishing. This happened to me twice, and once to my father, though he could pick the nail up each time. What was incredible was that the nail followed the same trajectory each time it occurred, leaving no hole in the ceiling, no indication of its origin. A strange pattern began to emerge. These bizarre occurrences seemed to affect only men, not women. I never understood why at the time. This observation would gain significance later, long after we had moved out of the house. We had a yardman who lived in Wayne or Pontiac, Michigan, and had recently been laid off from one of the car companies. Curious, I asked him if he had experienced anything unusual in the house. He initially denied any odd happenings until, while painting the small attic room, the radio station on his portable radio inexplicably changed. After that, he informed my mother that he would call us when housework was needed and not to contact him, clearly shaken by what he experienced. After some time, he settled down, though he remained visibly unsettled whenever inside the house. Twice while sleeping in my room, unusual phenomena occurred. The first reminded me of those old Pepto-Bismol commercials, where the man would bulge and wobble from discomfort. One night, I awoke to see my closet doors wobbling and bulging as though they were alive, moving in a slow, eerie rhythm. Recognizing that nothing I could do would change it, I closed my eyes and eventually drifted back to sleep, my mind racing with questions about reality. Living there for a year made me wonder if my family and I were slightly insane to endure such experiences. The second incident was more subtle but unnerving. I felt someone walking in my room. I heard the soft creak of floorboards under invisible footsteps, and though there were only 3 audible steps, there were no depressions in the carpet to indicate a person's presence. Again, feeling powerless to stop it, I simply returned to sleep, trying to convince myself it was a trick of my mind. One afternoon, while playing on the frozen lake ice with my friend Quigley and his dog, Mambly, we would try to make the best of it. Shooting his dog into the yard required some coaxing with a tennis ball. Getting his dog into the yard required some coaxing with a tennis ball. Once on the porch, the dog froze, stared up the staircase inside the house, whimpered, and retreated to the edge of the foundation, refusing to approach further. The dog's fear almost dragged us off the lawn entirely, and it stayed in the street, unwilling to come near the house again. Baffled, but seeing no visible specters, Quigley and I proceeded inside to grab cookies. After the brief snack, as young adolescents, we began wrestling and roughhousing upstairs. During a tumble onto my solid pine bed, it snapped in half. I had owned that bed for 12 years. Though it had endured countless rough nights, this was the first time it had given out. Slightly embarrassed, we went downstairs, and Quigley left with his frightened dog, leaving me alone in the eerie house once again. I had another friend named Justin, who had a beer can collection, as I did. I kept mine in the small attic, and therefore did not go there very often, knowing that if I invited Justin over, the ghost would inevitably pay more attention to someone new. I told him about the haunted house in detail, warning him of its strange history, and we went over to check out my beer can collection together, cautiously prepared for anything unusual. Justin reacted rather well for the first 10 minutes, except that I did not have 10 minutes worth of beer cans to show him. He frequently got a surprised look on his face and tried to brush something off his shoulder, as though he felt an unseen presence lingering close by. 3 times, I asked him if he wanted to leave until he strongly told me that he would inform me when he wanted to go, insisting he could handle it. He just walked back and forth between the same racks, staring at the same cans, over and over. 3 minutes later, he finally asked to leave. Going down the stairs, I cautiously asked him if he had felt the ghost touching his back. Abruptly, he turned to me, his eyes wide with genuine fear, and without answering my question, told me never, ever, under any circumstances, to take him back to that room again. Years later, I described to him exactly what had happened, the feeling I mentioned earlier from paragraph 3, and he was astonished that I had recalled it perfectly. He said, "It was like walking down a deserted road for thousands of miles, knowing someone was right behind you." Nonchalantly, I told him that I had lived there for an entire year and was thoroughly accustomed to the unsettling feelings of that house. When we moved to the house, we had a cat, and the cat would normally be a typical house cat, staying around the house with only a few late-night jaunts. However, the critter's behavior changed dramatically. It rarely spent time around the house and finally left altogether. I never understood exactly why, but it seemed animals, sensitive to energy or the supernatural, did not like this house and instinctively avoided it whenever possible. The problems of living in that house were never shared with our neighbors directly. Surprisingly, a neighbor from 3 houses up the block would often ask me how I was doing and how things were going whenever he saw me. Only much later did I realize that his questions were not casual. He was subtly checking to see if I was okay in the haunted house, aware of the strange disturbances that had plagued us, but too polite to ask directly. Once, my father and I entered the room next to the small attic and immediately felt a presence. Attempting to lighten the atmosphere, we began speaking aloud to the ghost, suggesting we might try being nice, or even take the ghost to lunch to make it feel welcome. About half an hour after we started, without a single word from the spirit, the entire room suddenly radiated an ominous, hostile energy that strongly suggested, "Stop now." During that time, the feeling pressing on my back could sometimes be shrugged off or whisked away with a simple brush of my hand. 30 minutes later, we both got up and left the room. I asked my father, a former secret agent, and certainly not a man easily frightened, "Let's never do that again," and he quickly agreed without hesitation, fully understanding the danger. Coincidentally, the time we lived in this house was also when the movie Poltergeist was released in theaters, and I definitely went to see it. After a while, it became obvious to the family that I was having significant difficulty living in the house. Once, I asked my father if anything had happened to him that he had not told me. He recounted an incident from a few weeks earlier, where he was sitting on the porcelain throne, and suddenly the wastepaper basket flew across the room without his permission, defying all logical explanation. My definition of an area influenced by a poltergeist is one where inanimate objects fly around the room without any instruction or physical contact from anyone. Up until that point, no one else had witnessed our poltergeist, and we were initially determined to remain in the house because it was ours, following the sentiment of ownership and stubbornness. Late one night, I lay down to sleep for perhaps 10 seconds, and then suddenly opened my eyes. What I saw could not exist within a 3-dimensional reality. In a period of less than 2 seconds, a gray object entered my room and shot up into the ceiling above it, moving with an impossible speed and direction. I still get chills just recounting this experience. The object appeared as a gray blob, with enough TV screen fuzz to blend slightly with the background, yet still distinctly visible. As it entered the room, it moved 4 to 6 feet and went straight into the ceiling, striking 2 separate points simultaneously. It did not stretch or visibly separate, and it retained its shape entirely while entering the ceiling, which left me stunned and utterly convinced that I had indeed seen it. This was not a reflection of a window or a car's lights. It was something entirely unexplainable. Realizing there was nothing I could do about it, I eventually went back to sleep and told my parents about the incident the following day. Story 2. As a devout Christian and reverend, the experiences witnessed over the years, even those considered benevolent, continue to send shivers down the spine. There seems to be wisdom in the angel's consistent admonition not to panic upon their appearance, a caution that speaks to the profound weight of the unseen. Though most peers regard an interest in the supernatural as off, such phenomena have long held a deep fascination and intrigue that persists despite societal judgment or skepticism. Encounters with the inexplicable have shaped understanding in subtle and profound ways, revealing that the spiritual realm is far closer and more intricate than ordinary perception allows. Most of these stories fall into either angelic or demonic classifications, though some defy categorization entirely. Several personal experiences mirror those recounted in this thread, and the primary account of a demonic attack will be presented as succinctly as possible. While the narrative is naturally extensive, it has been carefully polished to ensure a compelling and immersive reading experience. It's designed to hold attention without sacrificing detail or impact. As a child, I often heard voices, not the schizo kind, but the truly terrifying, poop your pants kind, and suffered frequent night terrors. Considering that my household was steeped in anger and tension following my parents' divorce, this hardly comes as a surprise. Shortly after the separation, my mother and I moved into a new home where I experienced my first undeniable brush with the paranormal. I had unpacked all of my clothes, as instructed, before venturing out to explore the neighborhood. Upon returning, I discovered my clothes had been mysteriously repacked. Despite my earnest attempts to convince my mother, she refused to acknowledge what had occurred, and I was subsequently grounded, leaving me both shaken and incredulous. Over the next few years, I became acutely aware of a presence in our home, as did my mother, although she would never admit it. Multiple witnesses saw glasses sliding across tables, lights flicking on and off, doors opening on their own, and a few of us even spotted an apparition. I once thought it was a little girl in a Catholic school uniform, jumping rope. Looking back, I found it cool in a creepy way, but that was its form. The occurrences were frequent enough that few friends were willing to spend the night after experiencing them firsthand. My freshman year brought the first truly terrifying encounter. Had gotten into a fistfight with another student. He cleaned my clock and was suspended, isolated from a private school environment, and with no real friends in my grade. I spent the night in tears. I cried in my dark room and whispered, I'd sell my soul if I could just be popular. And in that moment, drenched in 14-year-old despair, the darkness answered me. I'll take that deal. The blood in my veins froze, and every hair on my body stood rigid. I could not bring myself to turn, but I knew that standing behind me was a very wicked-looking little girl. The next morning seemed ordinary, and I enjoyed a 3-day break from school, binging on the gold cartridge Legend of Zelda and A Link to the Past. Thursday morning arrived, and I returned to school to a hero's welcome. Apparently, the bully who had beaten me was expelled. That day, I gained friends, popularity, and even a date to homecoming. I could say it was a coincidence, but I know better. 3 years later, the paranormal activity persisted, but nothing compared to that night. I had become a violent, thieving, womanizing wretch and decided to unalive myself. I was seconds from plunging my hunting knife into my chest. The scar remains. When my phone rang, it was a girl whose pants I had been trying to get into. She invited me to a concert, and since I had nothing better to do, and she had a great rack and buns, I decided to go. She took me to a high school auditorium in the next town to see an obscure Christian band called the Newsboys. At the end of the concert, they gave the typical invitation to make Jesus your Lord. The people I came with pushed me into the aisle and urged me to respond. I was about to lash out at a man who shoved me when a kind elderly lady asked if I wanted to accept Christ. I had long ago written God off, so I smiled politely and said no. Yet something gnawed at me, and I said to God, if you're real, you have 2 weeks to prove it, or I finish what I started tonight. I would love to recount the full experience, but 13 days later, he did. I got myself saved, experiencing a rebirth that was paranormal enough to make a believer out of me. I went to sleep, feeling loved and at peace for the first time in years. But that is not the main point here. You want to know what it is like to be attacked by a demon. Around 3 in the morning, I awoke shivering. My room was frigid, and I could almost see my breath. At the end of my bed, I saw movement. Leaning forward to focus, I made out the little girl staring at me with empty black eye sockets through the footboard rungs. She leapt silently onto the end of my bed, crouching forward like a vile carrion bird, head cocked, eyes fixed on my soul. Sent, it said in a voice that sounded like that of a child, but felt like 1,000 rotting corpses. Why did you have to go get saved? All the money, all the girls, all the fun, and you had to go and ruin it. I could feel its icy breath sweeping across my sheet, curling my toes in instinctive fear. I couldn't stop staring into those eyes that seemed to pierce the souls of countless men and drag them into its vile clutches. Time seemed suspended as I lay there, powerless, until it screamed and leapt upon my chest. Its touch was like frozen death, and the shrill, piercing cry paralyzed me completely. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, and I wet myself as it hovered mere inches from my face, and I swear it was drawing life from me through its chilling presence. My mother had been awakened by the scream and was calling up the stairs. By this point, I was firmly convinced that death was imminent. Somehow, I whispered Jesus' name, trembling, uncertain if the sound had escaped my lips. The demon howled, recoiled from me, and for a moment, I felt air rush back into my lungs, though they still burned like after an intense winter run. I spoke the name of Christ again, and it howled one final time before leaping away and hiding in the corner of my room. Flying from my bed, I stood alone in the darkness, my mother rushing up the stairs. Summoning every ounce of courage, I commanded it in my Savior's name to leave my life and never return. It hissed in defiance before disappearing silently through the wall. My mother burst into the room, shaken, but chalked the incident up to nightmares. I wish I could have agreed with her, but the memory of its eyes haunted me. 2 weeks later, after returning home from church, I received a frantic phone call from my best friend's girlfriend. She was crying and screaming uncontrollably. Jimmy, we will call him, had become strangely violent, and she had locked herself in the bathroom, begging me to come immediately and intervene before things escalated further. I grabbed my mother's keys and bolted from the house, leaping into her car and speeding down the driveway. She watched and waved from the window, and if anyone had known my mother, they would have been convinced that a miracle was in motion. Every second counted as I raced toward Jimmy's house, my heart pounding with dread and determination. Entering the house, I immediately felt a suffocating force, like a punch to the stomach. The lights were on, but an unnatural darkness hung heavily in the home, palpable and oppressive. His dog, Jaws, the meanest creature I had ever encountered, was cowering under the kitchen table. I looked up just in time to see Betsy flying past the kitchen doorway and slamming into the living room couch. I rushed toward the living room and saw Jimmy standing there with a look of hatred unlike anything I had ever witnessed, while another friend rocked in the fetal position on the couch, frozen in fear. "Jim," I yelled, my voice cracking. "What the heck is wrong with you?" His eyes locked onto mine, and he cocked his head to the side, letting the rage fade into an unmistakable evil smirk. "Scent," he growled, more a hiss than a voice. "Why did you have to go get saved? All the money, all the girls, all the fun, and you had to go and ruin it." My body froze, my mind reeling at the realization of what was happening. The horror of the moment was suffocating. Tears streamed down my face, tears I hadn't shed since my childhood friend had ended his life years earlier. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I attempted to cast it out, just as I had at home, following the guidance of my pastor. Yet, it only laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to echo in every corner of the room. I realized that Jimmy, who had been away that weekend participating in his tribe's spirit summoning ritual, had essentially invited it in. I began fervently praying, asking God to bind it from speaking or influencing my friend. Gradually, the oppressive darkness in the house began to lift, and even Jaws started barking again. Jimmy shook his head in confusion and asked what I was doing there. To this day, he remembers nothing of that night, though the rest of us never forgot. Years have passed, but the memory lingers as a cautionary shadow, a reminder that some experiences cannot truly be left behind. Last summer, I discovered that one of the girls I had attended that concert with was having an affair. I hadn't seen her in years, but since I specialize in marital counseling, they reached out for help. At the initial meeting, I inquired whether the person she had been involved with was a family friend or a coworker. She revealed it was one of our old friends from high school and handed me a letter he had sent along with her. It simply read, "I really miss all the time we used to spend together. All the money, all the girls, all the fun, and you had to go and ruin it." Story 3. I grew up believing in nothing more than what I could see or touch. To me, supernatural stuff was no different from magic or fairy tales, and anyone who claimed to experience it seemed far too gullible to be taken seriously. That conviction remained firm until several years ago, when I got a job working security in an ancient crap bar. It was located in an older part of town and tended to attract a rather scuzzy clientele. I was working 2 jobs to make ends meet and took the security gig because I thought it would be intriguing to work as a bouncer. Reality, however, proved far different. My job primarily consisted of protecting the waitstaff and entertainers, as well as escorting rowdy patrons from the premises when needed. Mostly, my nights consisted of standing by the door, greeting customers, and doing my best to stay awake until the early hours, when I could finally go home. I worked there for almost 2 years and got along fairly well with the bartenders and most of the regulars. At closing time, I would secure the doors, ensure that every customer had left, and then hang around while the bartender balanced the drawer and locked the take in the office safe. The office was located upstairs in what had once been an apartment, though from what I could tell, it had not been lived in for close to 50 years. Several times, while completing the closeout, we would hear footsteps or bangs from downstairs. I always checked, but nothing was ever there. No forgotten customer, nothing in the bar that could have explained the noise. Amy, the bartender who usually worked the nights I did, eventually refused to go anywhere in the building alone. The wooden stairwell leading to the second floor had a landing with a quarter turn midway, so the top step was invisible from the bottom, which made it especially unnerving when shadows moved unexpectedly. One evening, as we began ascending the stairs, a kind of shapeless shadow slid across the wall on the landing, as if someone had walked directly in front of the light at the top of the steps. Amy immediately turned, crashing into me and pushing me back out into the bar. She made a panicked squeak in the back of her throat and shook her head violently, completely unnerved. I tried to laugh it off, but I had seen it too, and the sensation of that shadow sent a chill through me that lingered long after. It was as though all the small, unexplained occurrences we had witnessed or been told about over the months suddenly converged into a single, overwhelming moment of dread. From that point on, Amy refused to go upstairs to the office after dark. She would leave the cash and receipts in the kitchen for the owner to collect the next morning. I later learned from the owner that there was a long and troubling history of strange events at the bar. She had owned it for 6 years and never liked to venture into the office at night. Items were frequently moved or changed, both upstairs and throughout the bar itself, with no logical explanation. Several past employees had reported footsteps in the empty bar at night, and the owner had cycled through numerous staff members who flatly refused to continue working there. Strange as it may sound now, over time, these occurrences became almost a side effect of the job for me. Since they never seemed to directly affect me, I continued working and did my best not to dwell on them. That complacency ended one early fall night when the reality I had long chosen to believe came crashing down. I was stationed by the door, a formidable, solid wood structure with a vertical window about a foot wide running floor to ceiling beside it. I could see outside and would usually hold the door open for approaching patrons. That night, only a couple of people lingered. It was close to midnight, and I struggled to stay awake, leaning against the wall in my corner. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving droplets shimmering on the 2 cars parked out front, catching the faint streetlights in the wet sheen. From the window, I could see the intersection at the corner where the bar stood. The four-way traffic light defaulted to green for the usually busier north to south road, running along the building's western-facing back entrance. One man had been at the bar since before my shift began. He wasn't a regular, but I remember his face vividly, even now, years later. He paid his tab, picked up his white cowboy hat, and walked toward the exit. He was about my age, and his white cowboy hat had a brown belt around it, with a gold pin holding it in the front. His eyes were gray, and they radiated happiness. Would asking where it go, and they radiated happiness. Happy eyes seem like a strange thing to remember, but he truly seemed like someone who would be fun to sit down with and have a long conversation. I nodded to him as he walked out, not saying anything that I remember. I was probably already thinking about getting home and waking up early for my other job the next day. Over the coming weeks and months, I couldn't stop wondering, could I have known what my silence was condemning him to? And would I have done something differently if I had spoken? A simple, "Have a good one," could have made all the difference in a life that was racing toward its close, and the sound hit like a sack of potatoes dropping onto concrete. I don't remember if the momentary tire screech came just before or just after, but the impact instantly jolted me alert. Edders. It was a surreal, disorienting feeling as I pushed past the door and stepped out onto the damp, cold sidewalk. I didn't immediately realize what had happened. I could see the taillights of the white pickup truck cutting left against the red traffic signal through the intersection, and assumed that it must have hit one of the parked cars. Then I saw the white cowboy hat. It was propped up on its brim, lying in the middle of the intersection several feet away from the man. I yelled for Amy to call 911, urgently shouting that someone had been hit, and I jogged over to where he was sprawled helplessly on his back. His face had several small cuts, and it looked like his nose might have been broken, although surprisingly, there was no blood coming from it. When I reached him, he was trying to sit up and was making a wheezing, mumbling sound, as though he had the wind violently knocked out of him. I told him to stay down and placed my hand firmly on him to prevent him from trying to rise. His stomach felt unbearably heavy, like it was full of solid rocks, and he sank back down in slow, rhythmic, unsettling convulsions that terrified me completely. Blood was seeping out between his legs and pooling past his knees onto the damp ground. I had received rescue training, but at that moment, my mind went completely blank, and all I could think of was not to move him because of the very high probability of a spinal injury. His left hand was raised near his chest, the outer three fingers curled inward and shaking violently as though trying to communicate some silent panic. I reached out and gripped his hand tightly in mine. It was all I could think to do to anchor him. At that moment, he suddenly stopped shaking, though it was clear he was going into shock, and I could see him losing his fight for survival rapidly. Within seconds, he had progressed from trying to sit up to barely being able to move at all. His skin began to take on the terrifying appearance of thin, pale, almost translucent plastic. He rolled his head slowly and looked directly at me. The pupil in his right eye had dilated to an enormous size, and I could barely see the faint gray outline from the black core. A deep red pool was slowly spreading across the white of his eye. I watched in frozen horror as his vision slid past me, and his mouth spread into a silent, agonizing scream at what he was seeing. It started as a shuddering, trembling whisper, his fingers still gripping mine with desperate force. It was the sound of a child waking from a nightmare, a sound so raw and panicked it froze the breath in my lungs completely. Don't let them take me. Don't let them have me. Don't let them take me. Don't let them have me, he repeated, over and over, his face contorted in absolute horror as he stared at the nothingness directly behind me. Every repetition was slower and weaker than the last, as though each plea drained a little more of his fading life. My mouth went dry, and I felt a small, chilling part of his terror crawl into me, embedding itself in my very bones. It took him several excruciating minutes to die, and I sat in heavy, suffocating silence as his pleas slowly faded into shallow gasps and finally ceased altogether. His eyes never wavered, still fixed somewhere beyond the visible world. I sat there frozen, aware that something utterly terrifying, unseen and malevolent, stood just behind me, waiting silently to take him to a place that promised nothing but pure fear. The fire department arrived after what felt like an eternity, followed shortly by the police and several ambulances. They did not even bother with the motions of using a defibrillator or attempting chest compressions, as if his life was already considered beyond saving. Nothing like in the movies. They seemed disturbingly more concerned with getting him to the morgue than attempting any genuine rescue. I was asked to state the accident, though I carefully left out every harrowing detail of what I had heard him say in those final moments. The case was left officially open as a hit and run, and likely forgotten by those who deal with far too many tragedies to even count. I was never called to testify at any trial or mentioned in any follow-up investigation, as though the event had quietly vanished from official records. A few days later, I found out that the man's sister had visited the bar, desperately trying to contact me, seeking answers I could not bring myself to provide. I don't know why, but I could never bring myself to reach out to her, and shortly afterward, I left the bar and never returned. I still see him on some nights when I sleep, the image of his terrified, wide-open red eyes haunting me, along with his final desperate pleas for something, anything, to save him. I also remember vividly how his eyes had looked happy and full of life, mere seconds before everything in his world ended in a sudden, cruel finality, a haunting contrast that continues to echo in my mind to this day. Story 4. There is nothing life-threatening here. I can handle physical stuff that happens to me. That's just how I'm built. What truly scares me are the unexplainable events that no one can clarify, the things that defy logic and make my skin crawl, and heights and pool vacuums, for some reason, always unnerved me. Anyway, I was house-sitting for some family friends during the summer of 2006, my senior summer. The property was an acre, fenced in by high chain link, and consisted of a simple ranch-style house. The responsibilities were straightforward: water the plants, feed the dogs, and ensure everything was locked if leaving. They allowed me to stay overnight because the house was situated far from town, roughly 15 miles out, isolated enough that a lazy high schooler would hesitate to drive there daily. I didn't actually stay overnight until the final night. I brought 2 friends, Preston and Sean, to help with cleaning in the morning, as they were due back later that day. Sean was finishing summer school work, so he brought along his massive textbook to complete assignments while we relaxed. Preston and I prepared dinner while constantly reminding Sean to do his work. He complained about being hungry, so we told him he could eat and watch a movie with us, but he absolutely had to complete his damn work before the night was over. I remember this vividly because when I try not to lose something, I deliberately place it in a visible location and tell everyone around where it is. It is exactly what I did with Sean's textbook. Sean Preston, I sit in putting the papers in the book. I sit in placing it on the island here. Pencil on top. Okay, cool, no big deal. All 3 of us simultaneously walked into the living room. The living room was open, not separated by walls from the kitchen and dining area, only divided by a small step down and a median wall about elbow height. Sitting on the couch, one had a perfect view of the kitchen. There was also a ceiling fan at the center of the room, which became important later. None of us left the living room for the entirety of the movie The Bourne Identity, and the atmosphere was already tense, thick with anticipation. While watching the movie, I was exercising one of my bad habits at the time. I had just purchased a nice SOG knife with the assisted opening feature, which allowed the blade to flick open instantly by using my thumb. I loved doing that. It felt satisfying and precise. Well, that is exactly what I was doing, mindlessly flicking the blade while engrossed in the movie. The ceiling fan I mentioned earlier was on the lowest setting, mostly for comfort, to keep the air slightly circulating, and we weren't expecting any disturbances at all. You know how unaligned ceiling fans shake really hard on the high setting? This fan, for some inexplicable reason, began doing that while set on low. When I say low, I mean I could stop this with my front teeth without issue. Kind of slow. It should never shake at that speed, but there it was, violently wobbling as if resisting some unseen force. Initially, we didn't notice it until the shaking intensified dramatically, making the entire room feel unstable and eerie. I put my knife away and sat up, staring directly at the fan, perplexed and increasingly unnerved by what was happening. The moment I did, the fan stopped shaking entirely, as if acknowledging my action. Confused and slightly unsettled, I absent-mindedly flicked the knife open again, trying to understand what was going on. Immediately, the fan started shaking violently once more, creating a surreal, almost terrifying rhythm. This alternated several times until I finally made the connection. Clearly, the fan did not like my knife being out. We tested this multiple times, with the knife out, shake, shake, and knife away. Complete silence. The effect was undeniable and deeply unnerving, yet we continued watching the movie, our senses heightened, and each small noise amplifying our collective tension. When the movie ended, Preston and I immediately started yelling at Sean to complete his damn bookwork. I watched him get up and walk toward the kitchen. "Hey, what did you do with my book?" "I put it on the island. I told you that." "No, you didn't, Stet." I could see the confusion on his face from where I was sitting, so I got up, walked over, and behold, the book had completely vanished. We searched everywhere: cabinets, under the couch, under beds, even rooms we hadn't entered. Because of the fan incident, we had all stuck together, so no one could have moved it secretly. I have replayed this entire incident in my mind countless times, and I cannot recall us ever splitting up at any moment, confirming there was no logical explanation. Eventually, we began to lose hope and resorted to high school logic. Watch another movie until the book reappeared, or until we remembered where it might be. Preston asked if we could make the frozen pizza in the freezer, so I began preheating the oven. Out of habit, I opened the oven door, and bam, there it was, the textbook, right in the middle of the oven racks. All the papers had been pulled out, and the pencil lay at the bottom of the pan. Cool, at least the book was back, but the experience left us shaken and completely bewildered. Who the heck put the book in the oven? After numerous accusations, exclamations, and general what the crapery, we calmed down slightly and collectively decided that the house was haunted, and that was likely what had occurred. By then, it was around 2 a.m., and we were fully committed to an all-nighter. We settled down to watch another movie, when suddenly, we heard footsteps on the porch. I cannot definitively say whether this was a panic-induced hallucination or reality, but I swear we all heard them simultaneously. I will never forget how all of our necks instinctively craned toward the door at the same moment. At that point, my rational mind kicked in, and I became extremely concerned that someone was attempting to break into the house I was house-sitting. I grabbed my knife and the large mag light by the front door, flung it open, and saw nothing. I methodically checked the house, under the porch, around the dog kennels, which would have triggered loud barking, around the fenced yard, and damn the main gate. Everything remained securely latched, and there were no signs of tampering or intrusion anywhere, deepening the sense of unease and confirming the inexplicable nature of the events. We went back into the house and endured the rest of the night, constantly fearing all the things that go bump in the dark. The remaining hours became a hazy blur, but we messed off at about 6 a.m. I fed the dogs and watered the plants, but I had to get out fast for my own sanity and peace of mind. Just as I was about to jump into my truck to leave for good, I suddenly remembered that I had left my laptop charger inside the house, which forced me to step back inside, reluctantly and tensely. I will never forget the unnerving sensation of eyes piercing the back of my head the entire way back into the house. I could vividly imagine the door slamming shut behind me and being dragged somewhere within the house, consumed by some unseen horror. Every step felt heavier, the silence more oppressive, and the house seemed to loom around me as if it were alive and aware of my presence, watching my every movement. Before leaving, I left a note for the homeowners. "Everything is good. Thanks for letting me stay. By the way, your house is haunted." The most unsettling part of all this occurred not even 3 months ago, while talking with Preston. I casually asked him if he had been screwing with us, moving the book, or somehow rigging the ceiling fan. He had absolutely no reason to conceal a prank at that point, as he isn't the type to engage in long-running theatrics. Yet he firmly denied any involvement. He even admitted that he had suspected I might have been the one screwing with them, because they stayed with me that night. Story 5. A house exists in a small, mostly unnoticed suburb on the outskirts of the city. At first glance, it seems nothing special, just an old wooden house from when the area first started developing, with an attached segment that looks like an afterthought, coming about 30 years too late. It reeks of age, with stained outer walls and warped siding, but the mystery of the house lies in the door on the second floor. No stairs lead up to it, and a solemn light hangs above it, casting a dim, eerie glow on the rust and mold covering the house's exterior, making it feel strangely alive in its stillness. This door caught the attention of someone I had the misfortune of interacting with. She was a friend of a good friend, and we were all hanging out one night. Being in the lowly suburbs during summer meant driving around aimlessly, avoiding going home. We were all still in college, and that first summer back after freshman freedom felt especially stifling. I would do almost anything to avoid my family, including being stuck in the back seat with someone I barely knew behind the wheel, navigating streets that seemed both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. As we drove through the slummier, more rundown streets, this bish squealed on the brakes and pulled a U-turn, speeding off. My friend and I had no idea what was happening. She kept repeating, "I know this place. It's here somewhere." After much unproductive searching and circling, we finally realized she was looking for a house she remembered from her childhood. She mentioned the second-floor door with no stairs, and that was all the detail she could recall, which only deepened the sense of unease that had begun to settle over us. An hour passed as we tried to locate this house, having nothing better to do. But soon, we noticed a strange pattern. We always ended up back at the same intersection, moving in the same direction, no matter which twists or turns we took. My friend remarked that it felt like we were trapped in some sort of loop, unable to escape. The strange cycle continued until the hour waned, the sun began to set, and the weird energy surrounding that area finally seemed to release us, letting us move forward once more. That's when I saw it. A light flickered on and off above the stairless second-floor door, hovering over space. "Is that it?" I asked, pointing directly at it. Both this bish and my friend looked at it as we slowly drove past, and both insisted, "There's nothing there but an empty lot." That was a striking one in my mind. A moment when I should have immediately gotten out of the car and never looked back, but curiosity chained me in place. We turned around and drove past the house again. I pointed at it once more. "Are you sure that's not it?" This time they did see it, and the bish behind the wheel yelled, "That seps it." We had someone following us, so we couldn't stop. As we passed, the rustle of curtains was unmistakable. Hauled in. No cars were around. No garage to conceal anyone. The place appeared abandoned, yet something was moving just out of reach. My entire body shivered. It felt like the staticky sensation when a foot falls asleep, but this pulsed over my entire body simultaneously. Once we gained distance, the sensation vanished, and I realized I had been holding my breath the entire time. Seeing it once wasn't enough for this bish. We turned back for a third pass, driving slowly this time. The static sensation returned, intensifying and spreading past my skin, feeling like a rush of cold deep into my bones. My friend was visibly freaked out too, but the bish insisted on one more look, ignoring our protests. She told me if I was worried, I should lean forward in my seat and duck my head behind my friend's chair, who was riding shotgun. I complied, feeling foolish, and we drove past the house once more. I didn't wait for the all clear. I mistimed my glance and peeked up just as we passed the house. There was no mistaking the rustle and shapeless black mass in the window by that stairless door. Before my brain could fully process it, two icy hands seemed to grab my hunched-over shoulders, shoving me back into my seat. It felt like something was attempting to pull me through the mass, dragging me toward the house, as if it hungered for me, its presence overwhelming and inescapable. I must have made a noise because it startled my friend, who turned around to see me shaking uncontrollably, pale and unable to speak. The bish behind the wheel sped us far away, fast. Once we passed what seemed a safe distance, the icy hands released, fading as if dissolving back toward the house. My friend later said, "I must have dozed or passed out briefly, though I remember none of that." I spent the entire way home trembling, my mind racing and body tense with residual fear. I didn't sleep enough that night to dream. I watched the same movie 4 times in fragmented intervals, stealing an hour here, 30 minutes there, until I had to wake up for work the next morning. Exhaustion finally overcame me the next night, and I dreamt of the house. I was in a wooded area with friends, following an unknown man to a clearing containing a structure. It was the old house with stained walls and the second-floor stairless door. A shadowed, shapeless mass passed through the door, forming a giant hound with glowing red eyes. The creature drooled black mold and attacked the ethereal stranger, tearing him apart. I understood instantly that the spirit had been erased from existence. The hound then turned its piercing gaze on my friends and me. I warned them to run, but my own foolishness led me to charge it. I woke up just as its teeth and rusty claws broke skin, leaving only its red, glass-like eyes burned into my vision. This recurring dream continued with different strangers falling victim each time. Even 5 years later, certain nights I awakened drenched in sweat, blinking to shake off the lingering memory of the house and those haunting eyes. All I can do is curl up beside the nearest warm body, whether it's one of my 2 cats or my boyfriend asleep next to me, and try to ignore the sensation of being pulled toward the house, a place I wish I never knew existed. Story 6. Approximately 22 years ago, a friend and I experienced something that challenged my usual skepticism about ghosts. I have always considered myself level-headed, but the events of that night are difficult to explain. I will recount them as objectively as possible, including details necessary for context, atmosphere, and understanding, so that the story of that unsettling night unfolds clearly. The year was 1992. It was a Monday, and it was my last year in what we call a community school in Denmark. As I entered my classroom that day, everyone looked somber, and several of my classmates were tearing up. Then they told me that, let's call him Peter, a guy I had considered my best friend at the time, had been offed by a train over the weekend while attempting to haul his most precious possession, his moped, across the railway tracks. Incredibly, he managed to get off the railway before the train reached him, but he had to release his moped, which was then hit by the train, and in turn, struck him fatally, leaving everyone in shock and disbelief. It was extremely difficult for me to process, and I did not fully comprehend that he was gone until a few weeks later, when I attended an exam and noticed on the name tag on the table that his name was crossed out, replaced by mine. That's when I truly understood that I would never see him again. I cried all the way home from school that day, feeling a heavy emptiness and a deep sense of loss that would linger for weeks, shaping the emotions that would follow and affecting my sense of security and normalcy. Then, strange occurrences began happening. I heard someone call my name on multiple occasions from my sister's room, which was next to mine in our basement. When I went to check, she was never there. A few nights later, I struggled to fall asleep because I could distinctly hear someone breathing on the floor, approximately 1 meter from my bed. There was, of course, no one there. Initially, I attributed all of this to being emotionally distraught from Peter's death, feeling unstable and vulnerable. Yet the events still managed to deeply unsettle me and make the nights feel impossibly long. A few weeks after the exam, we celebrated our graduation with a party at a house near our old school. During the celebration, a few classmates and I decided to visit the school. The alcohol had put us in high spirits. I had consumed 4 to 5 beers and held one in my hand. However, the main topic of our conversation remained Peter and the sadness of his absence. Eventually, most classmates returned to the party as darkness approached, but I, along with another friend, let's call him Thomas, stayed behind. I desperately needed to talk about Peter, and I sensed that Thomas felt the same, making the night feel both eerie and strangely comforting. That night, we decided to sit on a bench with a small roof attached to the main building, where all the cool kids used to hang out. From there, we had a perfect view of the schoolyard and a smaller green yard with vegetation across from us, surrounded on 3 sides by buildings. The schoolyard itself was mostly concrete, except for a wooden structure with 4 basketball hoops attached. We tried to focus on memories, but the eerie atmosphere was already thickening around us as darkness fully set in, making shadows dance across familiar spaces in unfamiliar ways. Suddenly, we heard the footsteps of someone running quickly on the roof above us. Alarmed, we rushed out to investigate, but found no one. We initially dismissed it, thinking it might have been kids playing on the property, which was not uncommon on weekends. Despite our unease, we returned to our bench, still feeling paranoid, and resumed our conversation. Then, a light appeared in the green yard across from us, initially vague but intensifying, until it became blinding. Like staring directly into the sun, forcing us to shield our eyes in disbelief and growing fear. At the brightest point of the light, we heard a scream coming from the same location. The scream ended as suddenly as the light vanished, leaving us in complete darkness and paralyzed with fear. We ran back to the party as quickly as possible, hearts pounding and minds racing, fully aware that something unexplainable had just occurred. The events were unlike anything we had encountered before and would linger in our memories for years, haunting our thoughts in subtle ways we could never articulate to anyone else. A few days later, Thomas and I met again to discuss what had happened and attempt a rational explanation. The footsteps could have been children playing, unlikely, but possible. A car could have passed behind the building furthest from us, behind the green yard, and we might have seen the light from its headlights. However, this explanation seemed highly unlikely, as the car would have had to face directly toward the building, but the road behind it ran parallel to the structure. Moreover, it would have needed to have been the brightest headlights in Scandinavia to produce such illumination. Not impossible, but highly improbable. The scream we heard could have come from an animal hiding in the dense vegetation of the green yard, but I have never before, and never after, heard any animal produce a scream so piercing and unnatural. Another possibility is that someone might have been hiding and attempting to scare us, but the timing with the light and the scream made that explanation difficult to accept. Alternatively, someone could have been assaulted, but to our knowledge, no one was harmed in any way. We did not feel that we had fully resolved the mystery, but at least we were able to come up with a few possible, although highly unlikely, explanations for the strange events. I went home, and after several days and nights, I realized that the strange voice calling my name from my sister's room, along with the heavy, unsettling breathing I had experienced at night, had ceased. Perhaps my paranoia was subsiding, or the presence had simply left. Either way, I thought often about that night, though less frequently, as the years slowly passed. The memories remained, however, lingering in the back of my mind as an unresolved, haunting puzzle from my youth. Then, one night, I visited a newly created website, run by a team of Danish ghost investigators, and recounted the story in full detail. It was at that moment that I suddenly realized that all of the events of that night, the running, the mysterious lights, and the piercing scream, matched precisely the sequence of events that led up to poor Peter's demise. He had run from the train, the lights from the train had approached, and then he must have screamed in terror, just as we had witnessed in our eerily similar experience. I still do not fully believe in ghosts, but a part of me cannot help thinking that what we experienced that night was Peter's spirit trying to say goodbye. It was as if he had reached out, using the last traces of his presence to connect with us, reminding us of his life, his sudden absence, and the tragedy that had befallen him. Even now, years later, I cannot forget the sensation of being so close to something inexplicable, something tied to my best friend in a way that defies all rational explanation. My best friend was often an accident involving a train. Some eerie events that occurred at our old school a few weeks after his passing now appear to have been him, either attempting to contact us or silently saying his final goodbye. Story 7. There are several products available on the market, such as small Walkman-like devices, CDs containing pre-recorded sessions, or even computer programs that let you create custom sessions. However, I have always preferred to make my own personalized sessions using audio editing software. This approach allows me complete control over every detail of the session, from frequencies to timing, ensuring maximum effectiveness and safety. Consumer products often feel generic, lacking adequate guidance for proper use, which can limit their potential benefits significantly. My research into this field has led me to view most consumer products critically, as they often do not provide clear instructions for safe, beneficial use. For example, I encountered a program a few years ago that offered user-submitted sessions. Some featured sessions on the website were visually interesting, presenting crisscrossing lines representing frequencies, but they completely missed the actual point of the technique. While the situation may have improved over the years, I still prefer creating my own sessions because this approach allows far greater control and understanding of how the tones interact with the brain over time. The basic principle is straightforward, or binaural beats require headphones to work properly, as both ears must be isolated from each other. You play a tone in one ear, and a tone of a slightly different frequency in the other ear. The difference between the two frequencies creates a beat pulse, which the brain perceives as it combines the two signals. If done correctly, your brainwaves gradually entrain to this beat pulse, resulting in changes in mental states such as relaxation, focus, or sleep readiness. I find that sine waves work best, and it is generally recognized that frequencies above 1000 Hz are ineffective for this purpose. You start with a carrier frequency played into one ear, the lower of the two frequencies, which remains constant throughout the session. The second frequency, delivered to the other ear, begins at a point reflecting your current brainwave state. For example, the beta state, corresponding to a normally active mind, ranges from 12 to 40 Hz, with 40 representing high alertness or stress. I usually start a session at around a 25 Hz difference, as this is reasonably effective for most people. For instance, if my carrier frequency is 110 Hz, the variable frequency might start at 135 Hz, creating a 25 Hz difference. This difference is maintained for 1 to 2 minutes to allow the brain to synchronize with the beat. If you are less certain of your initial brainwave state, a longer period is preferable to ensure entertainment. Subsequently, the difference is gradually reduced in small increments. For example, 24.5 Hz, 24 Hz, 23.5 Hz, and so on. The time interval between each step must be adjusted through experimentation, as dropping too quickly prevents the brain from remaining on track. I typically structure my session so that the difference reaches 1 Hz after 25 minutes, following a gentle curve if graphed, and then maintain this delta state for approximately 1 hour. This mimics deep sleep or the effects achieved after years of disciplined meditation practice. For my carrier frequency, I currently use 110 Hz, although initially, I had to start with a higher, more comfortable frequency of around 150 Hz. Starting too low too soon can increase mental stress, which has positive effects if managed properly, but should be approached carefully. There is a controlled stress that occurs in the brain during these sessions, which triggers the release of endorphins, producing a pleasant and noticeable sense of relief. Additionally, it is hypothesized that this activity promotes the formation of new neural connections between the two hemispheres of the brain. This makes sense because the beat pulse that the brain locks onto does not physically exist when using isolated headphones. If you were to play the same sounds through standard stereo speakers, the beat pulse would be tangible, as sound waves in the air would collide and interact, amplifying or degrading one another. With headphones, however, it is not physics altering the sounds, but the brain itself modeling the wave interactions. I find this neural phenomenon particularly fascinating, and it adds a layer of control and subtlety to the practice that is scientifically intriguing and mentally engaging. This controlled stress appears to produce long-term positive effects, such as a higher tolerance for stress experiences that would normally frustrate or upset you, causing far less reaction. Over time, gradually increasing the stress exposure by lowering the frequency allows the brain to adapt, improving mental resilience and endurance. However, beginning with too low a carrier frequency too early can result in headaches or feelings of general discomfort. Prolonged sessions, such as listening all night while asleep, or sessions conducted under the influence of psychedelic substances, are not recommended, as the results could be unpredictable or counterproductive. I typically conduct 90-minute sessions, with the first 25 minutes gradually reaching the delta state, and the remaining hours spent maintaining that deep, relaxed state for recovery or meditation. Delta is not the only beneficial brainwave destination. The theta state, generally between 4 and 8 Hz, is associated with creativity, light sleep, meditation, and short restorative naps. Historically, inventors such as Thomas Edison reportedly achieved their best ideas while taking short naps, demonstrating the practical benefits of this brainwave state. Alpha waves, ranging from 8 to 12 Hz, are linked to focus, learning, problem solving, and mental contemplation. Sessions targeting alpha are particularly effective when studying or performing tasks requiring concentration, providing a natural enhancement of cognitive function. All binaural sessions are typically combined with a comforting auditory backdrop, such as the sound of ocean waves, rainfall, or soothing music, to enhance the immersive experience. Interestingly, the binaural tones themselves do not need to be very loud. They can be barely audible while still producing the beat pulse internally. The important aspect is the perception of the pulse, which is generated entirely within your brain from the interaction of the two tones. As long as you can perceive it, even if the backing track slightly masks the sound, the session is functioning as intended and producing its intended neurological effects. I do not engage in these sessions regularly anymore. Initially, I practiced frequently for many years, but wearing headphones for long periods became uncomfortable, making consistent use difficult. Currently, I reserve 90-minute delta drop and sustain sessions for occasions when I have trouble falling asleep, have not obtained sufficient rest. I also maintain an alpha session in my guitar recording software, which I occasionally play while working, though I often forget it exists. It is somewhat amusing that, despite all the effort I have invested and the benefits I have experienced firsthand, I still frequently neglect the tool that has proven so effective and transformative for my mental and neurological performance. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.